Enough for All poverty reduction strategy. One of the really amazing parts of last year is that through the power of technology, VCC got to start working more closely with Elders Wallace and Florence Alexson, who we're so fortunate enough to have joining us today. And so I'm going to invite them to open us in a good way. And I invite everybody to your computer and your faces have joined the room, but to really join this space in mind and spirit as well. So Elders, I will turn it over to you.
Good afternoon. Normally when we open up a session, a meeting, and that type of thing, we usually start off with a smudge. It's our communication with the Creator. So when we say our prayers, we'll light the smudge, and I know you can't smell it or feel it, but you can see. So the smudge has been lit. So we're gonna start with the prayer and that type of thing at this point in time. We'll say our prayer, and then we'll go ahead and sing an opening song. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say a few words in my language, which is Sutu Ojibwe. We're from the Prairie Provinces. We come from Saskatchewan, a little reserve there called Kakewishtahow. And if you're familiar with the #1 highway going east, we're just north of Broadview, Saskatchewan. So that's the area that we hail from. Saulteaux Cree people that live in that area. And my ceremonies that I do are mostly in Saulteaux Ojibwe. That's where I was raised, and that's the ceremonies that I carry. Get going now. I'm going to say an opening prayer, and then I'll have the opening song, and we'll be ready to carry on with the meeting. Kichimani too. Ginanishka kanagritu yana kanagiguna mishomis. Migwichka tut manmanungo. Thank you for coming, Creator. Migwichgo. Anugumni nonde anamiakwe. My name is Wallace Alexson, my Christian name. My name that I'm known by in my community and to my Creator is in my language, it means man of the earth. I'd like my wife here to introduce herself as well, and then we'll get on with the prayer.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Elder Florence Alexson. My spirit name is Niganikapu, which means someone who steps forward. And I'm also Saulteaux Cree, come from Saskatchewan. I've been with my husband for many, many years, and we reside here in Calgary. We've made Calgary our home. So we're doing prayers and ceremonies associated with different companies or organizations. So we're so happy to be here. I'm very happy. Thank you.
Nice to see most of you. A lot of you I won't be able to see. I see the names, but no picture yet. Creator God, thank you for coming to sit with us, Creator. We look forward to having a good meeting here today. lot of beautiful people that I see on the picture here. Unfortunately, we have trouble with this kind of technology with our ceremonial stuff. We're used to, shaking hands, giving hugs, and those kind of things. But it's very hard to be into the technical side of things. So we're going to do the best that we can to do what we can to help you with your meetings and that type of thing. We feel very good now that we understand how technology works here. So did you want to say a little prayer for the people?
I just want to say that I'm happy to be invited to this meeting and to be saying these nice things and blessings for everyone. I just want to tell Wallace that both myself and he are into doing this sort of ceremony. So we've done a few already, and we just want to say the prayers for the meeting to be good and solid and to have a good meeting. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Creator, for coming to sit with us and looking after us. You that knows how to do it all, Creator. Thank you for coming to help us. I want to sing an opening song, and we can carry on with our meeting then. When I sing this song, I would like you to open up your minds, open up your hearts, reflect on all the good things that is going on in our lives at this point in time. There's a lot of negativity, but that's beside the point. We can handle that. We're resilient. We're very strong human beings. All of us. Doesn't matter what culture we come from. We're all the same. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for coming to sit with us, Creator. We ask your blessings for everybody here in this circle, in this meeting. Okay, let's carry on with the meeting.
Hand to heart, Elder Wallace and Elder Florence and Chimagwech, to you. Thank you so much for starting us in a good way. We always, of course, invite you to stay with us. And one of the great things about working with Calgary Reads, I think we started working together pre-pandemic, and one of the conversations that we had was around literacy and storytelling, and how important it is from that Indigenous worldview that that the words and stories that we hear are such an important part of literacy in our early learning and our journey. And so it's been wonderful, Elders Florence and Wallace, to hear about your journey and your story. So hand to heart to you. Thank you so much for starting us in a great way.
We've got a lot of stories to tell.
I love it. I kind of feel like another story.
This needs a little time.
That's amazing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So welcome again, everybody. We're just so happy that you're here and could join in that ceremony as well. We are gathered, as I mentioned at the opening, for our 369 series with Calgary Reads, leading the charge in early learning and literacy. Just as a few housekeeping things, so make sure that you're on mute unless you are speaking, but we will encourage you to speak towards the end. And we are going to be monitoring and hopefully having some activity in the chat as well. So make sure that you kind of join there. If you have any questions about any of the technical side, feel free to private message Jacqueline if you want to raise your hand, Jacqueline Silbernagel, who's also with Vibrant Communities and will be a bit of our sort of our ambassador or host for the day as well. So I am going to turn it over to Stacey Pinney, who's the lead at Calgary Reads, but who, I don't know, seems like there was something going on in the world today, maybe a little inauguration to the south. So I'm not sure if anybody caught Amanda Gorman, who was the poet who spoke today. She was amazing. The youngest inaugurational poet laureate that they've ever had. I mean, it's really inspiring to hear her speak. And one of the things she said is, there's always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, and if only we're brave enough to be it. And I think that's such a beautiful statement. And in our work in poverty reduction, obviously, there's a lot of heavy. But one of the things that makes our jobs and my job so rewarding is being around people who are persistent and tenacious around light. And to me, Stacey is one of those people, hands down. I've yet to work with somebody who's quite so persistent in terms of what she's doing, and who finds beauty in a lot of dark spaces in our work. So it's my pleasure to hand it over to Stacey.
Thank you, Megan. And I have to say, you and your team are my light. I will never forget the meeting last year, the grade level reading meeting, and you and your team came, and we have been feeling a little hopeless about that very important work. And when you said we could help you backbone this, it was like, the heavens opened up. So we all need our friends. And I think you and your team and your care for the importance of early learning as part of the poverty reduction strategy, and your willingness to pitch in and do the work of convening that is required to have big and important conversations is just very important to me. So thank you so much. I also want to give a big shout out to United Way, because United Way has been there for us with our early years work. And it's because of some of the legacy investment that this 369 series is starting to be a new idea on the landscape. And I'm going to briefly tell you a little bit about why 369 and why this. And I'm going to be as brief as I can, but know there's miles of words and stories and experiences behind this magical number. So the 369 series is something that we're going to commit to do on the third day of the work week, on the third week of every month. And it's only going to be for 69 minutes. So everyone can block that off. This special third thing's going to go on for 69 minutes. And 369 this is my hero. He can't be here with us today, but 369, this is Nikola Tesla. And Nikola Tesla was, some would say, really the inventor of the light bulb and electricity and all the things that Edison is credited for. So those unsung heroes that are brilliant innovators. who wouldn't want in our sector to be inspired by such a character? So the 369 is Nikola Tesla's favorite wonder number. And I'm a reader, not a mathematician, but if you are a mathematician, 369 is a spectacular number that does all kinds of cool mathematical things. And so I really love it when the numeracy people can talk to the literacy people and we have some shared things in common. So the 369 series comes from the inspiration of him, but more importantly, it stands for that 3-year-old. And we know that the vocabulary of a 3-year-old predicts the 6-year-old's ability to be ready to read. And the 6-year-old's reading level is going to predict this transition from grade 3 to grade 4, when children are suddenly called upon to not learn to read, but be expected to read so that they can go on to use reading as the platform upon which they learn. So it was the perfect number for the work that we have been called to do at Calgary Reads and in our community to ensure that the 3-year-old milestone is preparing children for the 6-year-old milestone and the 9-year-old milestone. And ultimately, we would have a 0 to 8 early learning continuum that we commit to in our community to ensure children are set up for life and for success. The 369 series is the first of things we will begin to bring out, and they represent a merger of our 7-year investment in the first 2,000 days. And many of you on this call know that the first 2,000 days is one of those things prior to COVID that was part of the old world, and it is not going to be here on the other side of COVID because of lack of funding. And we also had another coalition called the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, which was striving to ensure that children could read by 3rd grade. Neither of those will exist when we all come together again. And 369 is going to inspire us to wonder again, to begin anew. It feels to me like we are needing to continue a very, very important conversation, but we have a chance to begin it anew. And we also, like any good spiral, you come back to the beginning, but in a spiral, unlike a circle, you are wiser, you know more, you've experienced more, and you continue to deepen and grow. And the 369 will be a lever of the poverty reduction strategy, as well as a series. So stay tuned for more information about this important and I hope inspiring redesign of the important early years work that we are committed to. It is my pleasure to get to introduce Janet. And Janet is, I'd say, a kindred spirit. Janet used to be the executive director of Literacy Alberta, another casualty of change and time. And it's with great enthusiasm that I have someone like Janet, who is, I'd say now, as the Director of Human Capital Centre at the Canada West Foundation, given some space, maybe every once in a while, to step back, think big, do the research that so many of us, when we're on the ground, just can't do. And I look for her leadership and guidance as we navigate a new literacy territory, and sadly, a literacy territory that has been really disrupted by COVID. And children have lost a year's worth of learning in many cases. And there is an urgency to this work. And you're going to hear her talk about that. Janet has just also written, probably a month ago now, a great op-ed co-wrote with Gary Marr that I encourage you. And in the link to follow, we will attach some important documentation that we hope you'll take a look at that will give you some more context to what she's going to talk to us about today. So Janet, so that we have time to learn from every word that you have shared, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Stacy. It's a real pleasure to be here. Let me just share my screen so that, and to the, hang on, slideshow. Oop. There we go. All right. So thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me. You know, it was great to reconnect with you, Stacy, over that op-ed that I wrote with Gary. I think it was just prior to Christmas. It took a while till they actually managed to print it, but it was based on that report that came out from the Children's Literacy Foundation, the Canadian Children's Literacy Foundation, with Deloitte on the impact of literacy. And also the work out of the University of Alberta about the fact, as you mentioned, that children are losing reading skills during COVID. And that scares the heck out of me because of what I know is so important. You know, as it said in the invitation to this talk, I'm the mother of 4 children. I know, they're all adults now, but I know very well the value of early literacy and the impact literacy had on my family. You know, I remember so many days when the stew was boiling, you know, sticking to the pot, and the kids were screaming and running around the house, and the washing machine had broken, and I was at the end of my tether, and I just turned everything off and sat down and read on the floor with my kids. And so I know the value of early literacy. I know how it brings families together and it can make life just so much more enjoyable. And I know about the impact it has on children's vocabulary, as you mentioned, Stacy, and on the capacity to imagine and the places that you can go and so on. But I also, through my work, since I left family literacy back, I was there in family literacy in the early 2000s. And then I got myself into adult literacy and looking at the value of adult literacy. And now in my research into human capital, I'm seeing the value of literacy at work. So let me tell you a little bit about the Canada West Foundation very, very briefly. For those of you who do not know, we are a think tank based here in Calgary. We are nonpartisan, objective researchers. We do work into 3 main areas in trade and investment, in natural resources, and my area of human capital development. And we provide practical solutions and recommendations to government about how policies can be made better to serve the people of Canada better. And we've included this picture. I was thinking earlier about, well, you know, COVID's got a lot of responsibilities, not the least of which the fact that I need a haircut. In the past, I've done some work on adult literacy that's been published in 2 major papers. Smarten Up, which is about the time, saying that it was time to build essential skills. It showed how there's a real gap between the work, the level of literacy skill that many people need in their work and the actual level of literacy skill that they bring to their work, which means that people are not as productive as they might be. And then Literacy Lost a couple of years ago now, where we talked about how people are actually losing skill in adulthood, which is another reason to be scared, because if, you know, as the world is getting more and more complex, the last thing we need is to be losing skill. And how do I, hang on a second. That's the picture you need to see about why I needed a haircut. Sorry, I'm changing this on 2 screens. So then we also wrote a series of 4 what we call What Nows, which are shorter papers. One that I'm going to actually delve into a lot more in this talk about the myths of literacy people don't understand. We'll talk about that later. I've also talked in Opportunity Lost about the cost of not having adequate literacy skills to the economy in Canada. I talked in Ready or Not, with my co-author about how university and other post-secondary students don't have the skills that they need. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then in the last one, the literacy hustle, it's about how in order to really get ahead in today's jobs, people need to be advancing their literacy skills. So what are the impacts? What is the lifelong impact of early literacy, or the lack of it? Stacy mentioned that children who are not reading fluently by the end of grade 3 may often continue to struggle throughout school and may leave school early. In fact, studies have shown that, children that aren't reading by grade 3 are often dropping out of high school by the end of grade 10, as soon as they are old enough to do so. And this is sad. It is unexcusable, and it is preventable. We really do need to be getting into classrooms earlier. In fact, we need to be getting into the lives of children much earlier than school, to help them be ready to learn how to read, and then to help them get that reading skill in those first 3 grades. And I don't need to be telling most of this audience about that. That is probably work that you are involved in. And it's very, very good, very, very satisfying work. What worries me about this, though, frankly, is that often children who are struggling to read are given some support by aides in the classroom or even teachers that do not fully understand the mechanics of teaching children how to read. And it's remarkable to me that it takes an organization like Calgary Reads to sometimes pass that information on to the people who are dealing with our most vulnerable children. This is something, again, that I would like to see change. So what happens as you leave school early and you go on into the world and you don't have the literacy skills that you need? I think it's pretty foggy out there for a lot of people. And it's 42% of the population that don't actually have enough literacy skill to function fully in the knowledge-based economy. They may have done well in the old kinds of jobs in the economy where even truck driving has become more complex, but there were those kinds of jobs, truck driving and in the resource sectors, where it didn't matter as much if you didn't have high levels of literacy skill. You could learn how to do the job you were doing, and you could do that job and you could make really good money. But those jobs, as we well know, are starting to disappear. And so those 42% that still struggle with literacy in adulthood are becoming more and more disadvantaged and living more and more, perhaps, in what we might think of as a fog. Oops. Oh, stop it. I'm having some trouble with technology. And just to continue with that, the idea that the jobs are getting more and more complex. They are more knowledge-based. We're asked to do more things like problem solve, to collaborate, to get along with everybody from customers to co-workers to people who are in positions of authority over us. That takes a high level of communication skill. We're often asked to write for persuasive arguments, persuasive reasons. That is a much more advanced level of writing skill than just being able to make a list or write a quick note to a coworker saying you need to do this when you start your shift. There's tremendous increases in the skill demands of jobs nowadays. And there's a problem for people with low literacy skill that goes beyond the just struggling in the job they've got. They have a much greater chance of actually having low economic outcomes. So wages are lower for people with lower literacy skills. People with high levels of literacy skill have always earned more, but right now they're earning more than ever because there's a demand for skills and employers are paying more for it. So that premium that used to happen for people with higher level skills is growing. People with low literacy skills tend to be unemployed more often and for longer periods of time. And they are more likely to to experience a workplace accident or illness. And so these are things that have been proven over time, and it just keeps sort of working over and over and over again, so that people with low literacy skill end up with further and further away from economic success over their lifetimes. And that is becoming more and more of a problem, as you can imagine, especially as jobs are getting more and more knowledge based. Some adults with a little literacy education do find ways to improve, and others that have had good levels of education and do have high levels of literacy lose skill over time. And this happens when you don't read, when you don't use your literacy skill. It's kind of like a muscle. And if you don't use your muscles to lift weights, you lose that capacity to lift weights. And if you don't use your reading skills, then you can lose skill. However, it doesn't take education as such to improve your literacy skills. It takes literacy practice. And so there is hope in adulthood and for children that have problems with literacy. It's just to spend a little bit of time every day to read more, to talk more with people, and to find ways to incorporate literacy into your life. This gets harder when, I read the newspaper every day. I'm one of the few people that still gets one delivered. And I read books for pleasure and for interest. And of course, I get paid to read. I get paid to actually use what I read to pull information together to write research papers. These are the highest levels of literacy skill. But for people with lower levels of skill, it can just take a little bit of time every day to read a little more, to read the back of that cereal box. And when you're online, to force yourself to read to the end of the article instead of just reading the headline. Often those headlines are a little misleading. And so we need to actually read further in the article that we're reading online so that we can get a fuller picture of what's actually going on in the world. And at the same time, it will help us to improve our literacy skills. There was a study done a couple of years ago by the Higher Education Council, Quality Council of Ontario, that showed that 25% of students that graduate from high school and go into post-secondary education don't have adequate levels of literacy skill. What's even worse is that they still don't have adequate levels of literacy skill when they graduate from that post-secondary education, which means that they're not ready really for the jobs that they're applying for and moving into, which means that they're not successful with their employers. This is a terribly large number, considering that we're talking about high school graduates. And I think that one of the things that has happened over time, although I haven't been able to prove it yet, is that the quality of education and the need for education systems to push people through the system is actually falling. I have talked to a number of employers, and I see that this is happening, especially in areas, unfortunately, with immigrants, a large number of immigrants and large numbers of First Nations and Métis and Inuit students. In Manitoba, for instance, I believe it's fairly well acknowledged that they've actually lowered the standards by which you graduate from high school, so that more people are graduating and things are looking good, but they're actually not making sure that students have grade 12 reading, writing, and arithmetic levels, which is causing problems for those students as they move on. When you think you've got higher levels of skill than you actually do, it puts you at a huge disadvantage. There are other issues besides employment issues and learning issues that are attributable to low literacy. Megan, you talked a little bit in the introduction about the social determinants of poverty and health, and literacy is one of those things. It absolutely is a factor in poverty, but it is also a factor in health. And in fact, I think it's up to 3 times as many people with low literacy skills are likely to get cancer or heart disease or diabetes as people who have adequate levels of skill. And so when I think about this, I get very frustrated because the costs of our healthcare system are going up exponentially, and we keep hearing about how we have to do something to change the costs of our healthcare system. And we know that increasing people's literacy skills helps them to maintain good health. It makes it easier for them to read the prescriptions that they get, and those very long forms that you get from your pharmacist when you get a prescription filled, and just to understand health information. One of the issues that we faced just recently around COVID, and we finally figured this out, is that even though many of our immigrants are highly literate in their own language, they may not be literate in English. And that has caused some confusion for them around the rules and regulations around COVID prevention. Frankly, I think it's been confusing for those of us with higher levels of literacy skill too, but it's obviously been that much harder for people with lower literacy, including people living in our in areas of the city and the province that have more immigrant populations, and I have no doubt those people living in on Indigenous First Nations. And Canada is actually in great shape, according to the studies around the world. Our students in high school and our adults have got good literacy skills compared to the rest of the world. It's just that it's not really good enough to really jump our economy ahead. The cost of, one of the big issues in Canada is that we're not a homogenous society. We have people at the very top level of literacy skill and people at the bottom level. There's quite a gradient in Canada, whereas in other countries of the world, they're more homogenous in their literacy skills. And because we have this wide range, we have so many people at lower levels of skill. We've got it really contributes to our lack of growth in productivity. And this is an area that we keep hearing from governments. We need to be more productive. We need to be more competitive. And they throw money at the question, but and the problem. And there's all kinds of money that goes into innovation and creativity and trying to have higher productivity. But my co-author Scott and I commissioned a piece of work just over a year ago now by two German economists who were able to look at much more recent data to see how much the impact of literacy has on actual GDP competitiveness and productivity. And what they found was that that impact is actually growing. We used to say that those of us who've been in the literacy field for a long time used to quote this, that if a 1% increase in average literacy skills across the country, if all of that literacy skill was used, would increase the GDP and productivity by some amount. But in the interim, since that study was done in the early 2000s, that impact has now grown. So that estimates are that if we increased literacy skill by 1% across the population, and we put all of that literacy skill to work, that we could actually increase our GDP by billions and tens of billions of dollars, which could actually help go a long way towards solving the problems that have been created over this year through COVID and the cost of helping people through COVID. And it's actually something that is possible to do. The study also showed that it's more important to spend that time to improve people at the lower end of the literacy scale. There's more, shall I say, bang for the buck that can be had if we put that investment into the low end. One of the things we have to do is get employers to understand that it's their responsibility as well. And we've always thought that was government's responsibility. Education is government, it's provincial. This is an education issue, but it's actually a federal issue as well, as I've just shown, and it's also an issue for employers. And what employers are starting to learn is that they are needing to improve the skills of their people, and they're learning that that learning can happen anywhere. Now, it's been a long time since we were all in a coffee shop learning from each other around a table, but that day will come again. And that learning can happen in community, it can happen online, it can happen in a classroom, it can happen on the job. And it's so important that we get this message across to employers. I spend a lot of time doing that. There was an article recently, just last weekend, actually, on CBC. Felice Chen from the CBC did this great piece, which actually covers a lot of what I've just talked about. And she talked about the importance to employers of improving literacy skills, because if nothing else, what we have learned in the last year is that the move to digitalization and using technology more in the workplace is becoming more and more important. This particular slide shows learning happening in community, but we also know that learning happens much more often now online. So the solutions, I've said something about solutions as far as employers, but we also need to invest and incentivize at all levels of government. And the first thing we need to do is to continue to assess and then provide support. The assessment can be done in various ways. There are, there are big tests of literacy and numeracy that are done at the national level, but there are also assessments that can be done at the community level through community agencies that are doing training with adults. And there are assessments that can be done by employers. And I would recommend highly that people don't just assume that people have skill. They know that they figure out exactly what skills people are missing, and then go about improving those skills. There's also lots of opportunity to improve skills. I think that it's fair to say that the federal government is throwing, well, I wouldn't say the word, maybe throw is not the right word, but putting millions more dollars this year into training for people who have lost their jobs, especially through COVID. And those training programs need to be geared specifically to people who've lost their jobs because they have some literacy differences between where they are and where they need to be. So we need to assess for that and then increase the support for improving those skills. Probably the best way to do that is through other training. We have found through numerous studies that if you embed literacy training into other forms of training for adults, that they actually will engage with that learning and learn better and then apply that learning. So, one does not go to an adult who's 40 years old and has had 20 years in the workforce and say, you got to come into a reading program. That's not going to go over very well. But if you are including some improvement in literacy skills into programs for other training, it can be very successful. And the other thing that I suggest we need to spend a lot of time on is building those competency frameworks, which is the other part of the work that I talk about a lot. When you have a competency framework, you can understand what level of skill people need in all of the skills and competencies that they need to build for their jobs. So what we don't know is what does it take to do a good job in a lot of the jobs that are being developed in the economy nowadays. We didn't have competency frameworks for the old economy, but the new economy is growing so quickly. New jobs are starting all the time. We need to be able to understand what are the skills that people need, what level of skill do they need, and how do we go about making sure that people are getting the training that they need to move from where they're at to where they need to be. And I'm sure I've missed out all kinds of things I was going to say with this, but perhaps we'll get to that as we get to the next piece of this presentation, which would be your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Janet, for that presentation. And again, we encourage people to, if you have some questions, to drop them in the chat, but maybe I'll get some things kicked off. And if you don't mind, if you can just stop sharing your screen, and then you can see more, you'll be able to see more people that way. But as Stacy noted at the outset, and I think as you reiterated about this foundational skill of reading needing to be embedded so that you can learn those other skills. Just wondering if you can talk more about maybe some of the barriers, whether it's at a policy level or in other areas that are in place that are kind of missing the boat in terms of digging in and really creating change in those early years.
Well, I think that those of you who are working in that area probably know better than I do. But just to, from my experience and understanding, there's a fear that we will hurt the children who are kept behind. That their social and emotional skills and development will suffer if they are kept behind in their program in order to learn. And in fact, I would say that you don't have to even keep them behind, but you do need to pull them out of the general classroom and give them the extra time that they need to learn. This should happen in, well, if we had it pre-kindergarten or junior kindergarten, to make sure that they're ready to read. We need, I was talking to Ariel at the Children's Literacy Foundation last week, and she was talking about a project that they have going up in Iqaluit, where they're working with public health nurses to get them to talk to young mums, to new mums, about the importance of literacy. So I think that there's a number of responses. One is, at the very least, don't push them forward into high school if they don't have the skills they need. But the big thing is to start tackling this well before the time they even hit school. So if literacy is part of the social determinants of health, let's get the health department involved in increasing early literacy. If we could better train our teachers in the mechanics of teaching reading, then we would do a better job in when kids hit the school system. We probably also need to ensure that early childhood educators and daycare operators have a better understanding of the importance of children's literacy. I get very scared when I see a mom walking down the street with her child in the stroller with her earbuds in and she's listening to music. She's not talking to her children. We know the importance of language in developing vocabulary, which makes those squiggles on a page make more sense. So, we have to start. I'm not telling, some of you anything new, but we have to start earlier, and our policies need to change because of the cost to us in the downstream end, in our productivity and competition and our healthcare. If we just need to push some of that down to the early years, we could do a much better job. And then when kids hit school, if they're not ready, let's just keep them in very small classrooms, working with them, doing the one-on-one, because the studies have shown that there are very, very, very few children that cannot learn to read in the long run.
Yeah, there's something to that customized approach that's required, I think, for individual needs that
I think so. Yeah. And in adulthood, we have the capacity to assess an adult's literacy and work out where in their brain they are missing something that is causing them not to read fluently. Maybe I didn't, say enough about fluent reading is not about being able to decode. It's about being able to apply what you have read to new and different situations. But there are pieces that make up fluent reading. And if you're missing some of those things, instruction can be directed specifically to that. That needs to happen for children as well. So what is it that's missing? Is it the phonemic awareness? Is it the vocabulary? Is it the working memory? What is it that is causing a child to not learn to read?
Definitely. We actually have, if Sarah, if you can unmute, Sarah just wants to ask you her question directly. So.
Sure, and you kind of started to hit on a little bit about the mechanics of how children learn to read. And my question was, there's been some research done, like in Edmonton Public Schools as a district, showing that with early screening for reading difficulties happening in kindergarten, and with a structured approach to literacy, which is very different than what's happening in most schools right now, which accords with the current science of learning to read, and proper intervention, that they can get about 95% of kids in that K-3 category reading at grade level. I have not seen a single thing that can have that type of impact. So I'm curious, if we can have that type of impact in the K-3 scenario with those simple changes, what's stopping a major effort to being put into those things in our education system? Like, what are the barriers to us actually getting this right? And this goes back to that education should be the great equalizer. I mean, we can say what happens in the home and we can hope things happen, but we have all of these kids in school and we have the potential to make an enormous impact, but we don't see it happening on a wide basis. And further to that, we see there's not many districts keeping data right now, but the two that I do know that are keeping widespread data about reading levels in schools in Alberta, they have 70% reading at grade level. They are missing a full 30%. And we also know that about 20% of those kids have a reading disability. So they are the largest cohort of disabled children in our system, and they are not getting what they need to be successful. So I'm curious, your thoughts on how we shift that and how we make that change going forward.
Well, Sarah, I don't have the answer. If I had the answer, I'd be able to get this done. I think part of the problem, frankly, is that Canada ranks fairly highly in the OECD. In the OECD, we rank on average in literacy. And but in PISA, we're ranking fairly high. And the PISA is the test of 15-year-olds across the countries that enter this. And so we rank fairly highly, and it's really hard to get the attention paid at the younger levels. I would love to have the answer for you, but if I had it, I would have done it because it's my role to write the policy papers that now my area of expertise is now in adulthood, but I will make this pledge that the next time I write about literacy, that I will put in the very thing that you have talked about. I have one of my children learned to read before he went to kindergarten. My second child did not learn to read until the end of grade 3. And I know what a difference that has made to her life in terms of self-esteem, right? That was really, really hard for her to have that learning disability that we helped to overcome in grade 3. But just even those first 2 years of struggling a lot, and seeing her classmates succeed, it has such negative consequences. So I have it from experience, and I have the understanding. I just wish that I could get the people to understand that this is a problem that is solvable. And in fact, just as with so many of these things that we talk about in our society, our civil society sector, if you put the money in, it's either pay me now or pay me later, right? So, we have this understanding that we need to do this work in the early years. And for some reason, I don't know why, we haven't gotten that through to the policymakers yet, but we'll keep trying.
Yeah. So yeah, I think there is work to do, not just at that level. I think, like as community members, and I'm just wondering, as members of the community, like, what do we do right now to make sure we're also contributing to children's literacy, just day to day, which I think is a bit of a challenge right now, and not interacting.
It is a bit of a challenge, and we have so many other challenges when we're talking to the people who are running for office, and they have so many other things that they're worried about. But it is the kind of thing that we need to be talking to community leaders and politicians and would-be politicians about. It would make Linda Johnson, who was a member of the Conservative caucus back in the before this round, she was very helpful around literacy issues. We need more Linda Johnsons and others in the world who listen to what we have to say and are going to bat for us at their caucus tables.
Yeah, thank you for that. Phil brought up actually a point about political views and critical thinking, and where are we headed, and if we can't, I think to your point about youth maybe not even entering post-secondary prepared literacy wise, let alone the job market after that. So, where do we go from there? We want educated voters, obviously, moving forward. And how do we, I think he says, am I missing the mark? Question mark. I think that's a big question, but.
Well, I think one of the keys about literacy, and it's not showing up. I'm doing some work now on the new framework for essential skills with the federal government, and we've got reading is still there. It is still the leading skill that is needed by everybody to some extent or other. But and discernment doesn't necessarily show up as a factor of literacy, but being able to problem solve does. And if you're not able to really read, you're not able to compare and contrast what you're reading and discern whether what you're reading is fact or fake news, and that contributes to opinions and the way people act, and as we know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely complicated, and yet we can whittle it down to let's talk to our children and let's read with and to our children and get that started. I wanted to jump into the clear link between literacy and GDP you talked about earlier, and kind of the encouragement to employers and levels of government to invest in literacy and training. Just wondering, how do we gain, I know you've talked about it a little bit, but maybe if we can talk a bit more about just how do we gain traction there, right? To actually move the needle.
Right. I think, I'm an optimist. I've been an optimist all my life. And I keep being optimistic, but I think that this is a moment in time, unlike others, because we've, when they went from horses and buggies to cars, that was another moment in time. But we have seen in this last year, this move to digitalization that has, some estimates are that it has compressed the time frame by about a decade. Employers were moving slowly in that direction. Now they're moving faster. They're adding new technologies, which requires higher levels of skill in order to apply those technologies well in their workplaces. Now, it is true that there are some people in the job market that could fill some of the positions that employers are creating. But I think employers are also realizing that their current workforce is not quite up to speed with what is needed. And they're beginning to understand that it's not about firing them and hiring new people, because some of the people that are in the job market looking for jobs don't have the skills that are needed. All of which is to say that the timing is now right for employers to start thinking, I need to invest in my people. And just as the gig economy is growing, and I'm working on a paper that is talking about that, that I do believe that employers are also realizing that the people that they have are the people that they need. They just need to help them become to grow in their skill levels so that they can be the people that they need. So that means that we're going to have opportunities for training. And I would go back to what I said earlier. We need to have a better understanding of what the needs are, and not just go in with canned curriculum to a workplace and say, here's your solution. We have to go in and find out what is needed to actually assess people, to figure out what they need, and then to figure out how to best and most rapidly improve their skills. And so I think that the time is right, and that we're going to see not just good, money from the federal government, but also from the provincial government. I've heard from Minister Copping that he's going to be putting more programs out there for workforce training, and with any luck, that will filter into other ministries as well.
Yeah, I think what struck me earlier is what you said. What does it take to do a good job these days? Like, what does it take to be good at your job? And I think that's a question I reflect on in a lot, and not just for myself, but for my children who, I also want to train up, and I'm like, what am I training you for? And so it's a very interesting that really, I think it starts with literacy. And if you have that, there's strength there.
Well, because literacy is the learning to learn skill, and it is the basis of being able to adapt and be resilient. And if you don't have the literacy skill, you can't learn other new skills. So absolutely, it is fundamental to what we need to do as a society right now.
Awesome. I think that's all the time we have for questions. Thank you so much, Janet. I'm going to pass things back over to Stacey to wrap, but thank you so much. It was wonderful to listen to.
Very welcome. Thank you.
I would add my thanks, Janet. I think we wanted today to bring a different conversation to the table, and not often do we think about early literacy and the economy. And sometimes we talk about it's a nice to have, but it's a very necessary to have. And I hope today, by Janet coming at it from the end of the investment, where we do probably spend more money in high school graduation and in workforce employment, how do we collectively shift upstream? And we're going to hold you to that promise of the next paper that you write. We're going to look forward to you helping us write that compelling case of why the investment in these young children is so good for business and so good for the economy. So thank you from all of us for making time today to be here with us. I want to just tell you about our next session, which will be held February 17th. And Suzanne Tough, many of you know, Suzanne Tough is a lead researcher for the All Our Families study. And hopefully several of you or all of you have seen the new research that has come out of the team from All Our Families and Apron. This study is really helping us understand the situation for children in this time of COVID. And Suzanne or her team are going to talk next time about some of these alarming statistics that they have put out into the world. 58% of families have experienced income loss. 20% of homes, all income sources have been lost. 80% of families say they are finding it difficult to manage their own work, schoolwork, and household tasks. 35% of moms are experiencing high levels of stress, depression, and anxiety. And the relationships between partners inside of homes is really fraught with tension. And I think we can all relate in some way or another to some of those statistics. And next month, we're going to have a deep dive into that very important research that can help us think not back in time, but moving forward. What are those supports that we need for young children so that we can change the trajectory of those statistics? And it will take all of us to ensure that we do that. We're only at 65 minutes. I've been watching really closely. And it was funny when Jacqueline told me there were 71 people that signed up. I'm like, oh, I wish there were 69. Then we really would have known there was magic in the number. I don't know that 69 showed up on the call, but we will, we are recording. We will send the information out, as I said, and I hope that you will join us for the second of the 369 series coming up in February. And please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us at Calgary Reads or any of us from Megan's team at Vibrant Communities Calgary. And if you want to get involved in any way in support of those kids in that 0 to 8 spectrum, please let us know, because we are building a community of people who are going to champion this cause and be tenaciously causing a ruckus. So have a great day, everyone, and we'll hope to see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very informative.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It was
Thank you.
great.
Thank you.
Bye, Stacy. Bye,
Bye,
Jill.
everyone. Thank you so much.